Alright, so now that we've set off the Ultimapper to generate our normal maps, let's now take a look at what we've come up with. Alright, so back in XSI, we've now used the Ultimapper and the render map has finished its computation. So let's take a look now at what we actually wind up with. So if I take a look at the pictures directory in my current project, you can see the different maps that it's currently rendered out. Alright, so here's the occlusion map that XSI just generated for us, the ambient occlusion map. Here's the height map, or the depth map, and then here's the actual normal map that it created for us. So now, if I want to be able to actually see what these look like on my model, what I can do is actually use the Ultimapper to create a preview for that. So one of the things I'm going to do first is, on this object, come in and remember how I said I was going to come back, and once the normal map was generated, I could just simply delete all of these move, all of these extrude, or these push deform operators that I had used before. Right? So now I'm right back to where I was. If I want to be able to get back to my Ultimapper, just simply select your low-res object, and then double-click on the Ultimapper. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and hide my high-res source. So once your maps have been generated, and they are in the current or the correct directory, what XSI can do now is create an OpenGL or a DirectX or a MentalRay preview. So let's take a look at an OpenGL preview. What I can do is just simply create preview. Now to be able to see that, just simply go down to real-time shaders and OpenGL. And now what I'm seeing is a real-time OpenGL preview of my model with the ambient occlusion map and the normal map applied to it. So you can see a tremendous amount of detail was actually transferred using this Ultimapper. So we have still this very low resolution piece of geometry, as you can see, but to look at it, it was able to transfer all of the detail from the high resolution mesh. Now you may see a little bit of flickering on your screen as I move around this mesh. That's actually completely normal. That's just a little bit of a refresh issue from the OpenGL, but you can see a tremendous amount of detail has actually been transferred over. So this is what we can use as a basis now for some kind of a texture painting. Right? So if I want to ever get out of this preview, I can just switch it from OpenGL back to something like a textured view. Now you'll see when I switch this back to a textured view, everything is still colored. So what I can do is just select my model, go down to the clusters underneath sample, and just throw away this tangents. Alright, so here's our object with the normal map visible currently. Now, what I want to be able to do is start the process of actually going back to Photoshop and starting to texture this object. So what I'm going to do is go to Material, and let's start with something like a constant. Alright, that'll give us a good starting point for this. Alright, so here's my constant. Now what I'll do is, a lot of times I like to start off with these because they don't contain any kind of shadowing or highlight information, these constants. So whenever I'm starting to build up any kind of a texture in Photoshop, this will let me see what that texture looks like without any interference from shadows or highlights. So this gives you a very, very good representation of the texture itself once it's applied to this constant. Alright, so what I'm going to do is jump over into Photoshop. Alright, and over in Photoshop, I'm going to go ahead and open up the Pictures directory. And in this directory, you should find all of the pictures that we just exported using the Ultimapper. So we have the ambient occlusion, the depth, and the normal maps. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and open up the ambient occlusion map. Now the reason I like to open this up and start with this is because it has a lot of the shadowing information already on it. So this gives us a great starting point as far as being able to paint just a few base color textures on here, but have that be carried over and have that be represented really, really nicely, this shadowing information, in the final color map. Alright, so very simply what I'm going to do is start with this background. I'm just going to double click on this, rename this to layer 0, so that way it takes that lock off of here. I'll make a new layer and drop it down below. Alright, and what I can do now is take this layer 0, this ambient occlusion layer, and what I want to do is switch this to a multiply mode. Now what that'll let me do is come in with some of these different colors, paint in whatever color I want, and that will appear below the actual shadowing. So it will really help to nicely shadow and shade these different textures that I'm about to paint on here. So I really only have to bother with very simple, basic skin tones. So what I can do is come in and start with a basic little skin tone here. Alright, now I can come in, increase my brush size a little bit, maybe give this a little more hardness, and then come in and just simply paint in a basic skin tone. So I can come in, paint this, just press and hold my space bar to be able to move back and forth. So very quickly, come in, and remember I'm painting on layer 1, so I'm actually painting just below the actual occlusion itself. And here we are. So now we have just a little bit of a skin tone on this. Now what I might need to do is come in to this layer 0, give it a levels adjustment layer, and let's try to choke back some of this shading just a little bit. Maybe try and increase some of these white areas. There we are. So that way it's not quite as dark, it lightens it up just a little bit. Alright, now what I can do is, again on this layer 0, or on a new layer if you want to, let's come in and start to paint in some of the eyes. So I can lower my diameter here to a fairly low value, and then simply come in and paint some white on top of these eyes. So you can see just how quickly this goes when you don't have to actually paint in any of the shadowing or the shading yourself. Alright, so I'll come in, paint this up, move over to the side, get this other eye, there we are. Okay, so, and like I said, you can really see just how quickly this comes together. So let's get a little bit of blue now for the eyeball, or for the iris of the eye. So let's dial this in until we find kind of a nice happy point. 11 looks pretty good. Now these, I'm going to need to be able to put on their own layer, because I'll probably have to come back and do some adjusting for this. So let's come in, paint a nice blue color right here in the eye. Do the same right in here. And I'll click a few times just so we're able to get a nice solid bit of paint on that. We'll come in and lower this down so we can now paint in the pupil right in the middle. And I might actually take that up just a little bit more, maybe something like 4. That pupil came out a little bit smaller than I wanted it to. There we go, that's a little better. And finally, just a little bit of gleam in the eye. So let's switch this over to 2, or something like that. Give just a little bit of a white highlight into the eye here. And now what I can do is simply come in with my eraser and just erase some of these areas away. Whoops. Undo that. So you can see just how quickly this whole process goes once you actually have this occlusion map already baked out and taking care of all of the shadowing for you. So there we are. There's the first part of this head finished up. So if you want to take a look at what this is actually going to be looking like on our game character, let's just simply save this out. Save this as a JPEG. We'll call this Game Man Color Map. Alright, we'll save this out as a JPEG. And now if we go back over into XSI, if I press 7 on my keyboard to pull up the render tree, what I can do is now connect this in. So we'll go up to Nodes, up to Texture, Image. We'll go to New from File. And if you saved the color map into the same pictures directory, it should pull right in. So here's the image. We can now take this, plug it into the color, and there we are. So that's what our texture map looks like currently on our game character. And you can see, like I said, because of the shadowing that's being taken care of by this ambient occlusion map, it really takes care of a lot of the work for us. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the lesson at this point. So in the next lesson, we'll continue with the process of painting this texture using Photoshop.